All right, I'm Chris Avano with the American Outdoor News Podcast. I'm here with Rachel Attila and Joe Tschanz from that. We're going to talk about their really amazing award-winning film, Fire in Our Hearts. Guys, thanks for taking the time to speak to us today.
Chris, thank you so much for having us on.
So, how did you come up with the idea of this movie?
Well, Joe, I'm going to let you speak to that because you were the first man on the ground and I was busy in sheep camp at the time.
Yeah, so it happened in 2018 was really when the film happened, and it was not and Rachel kind of that it was not a film where we really had time to prepare for or to even get grants or funding. It was just like, okay, the community is on fire. We got to do something to document and to go there. So it didn't actually start in a traditional sense like a film, where we had time to really script and have an idea of what we're going to capture. It was more get what we can, document what is going on, because at the time things seemed so unfair for the community. Just to give you a quick maybe rundown of the main concept, in 2018 here in British Columbia, there were fires all over and it was out of control. There were not enough resources and everyone was asked to evacuate. The issue with that, of course, is with community like ours, the South Side, they don't have home insurance, and there is nobody that will go there to protect the homes because it's too far. And so the community members did evacuate at first with the promise that people would come and BC Wildfire would come and install sprinkling systems. Of course, that never materialized. So they decided to go back and protect what is theirs, protect not just their homes, but also millions worth of timber for the province. But then, because they went back, the province got RCMP officers from down here in the Lower Mainland that had no idea what is going up there and what the resources are that our community has at hand, because most of them are loggers, farmers. They've been fighting fires since they were kids. And they started to bully them using scare tactics like show me your dental record, we need to know when your body burns, but also knocking on doors at 3 a.m. to disrupt their sleep. And the worst thing they did is eventually they blocked the ferry, which is the only lifeline to the South Side, and
Wow.
refused to let any food, pumps, or resources there through the ferry. And the community was completely isolated. There was a power outage, and it really felt like a war zone. And that's when I decided at the time I need to go there. I had to be smuggled in by the Czeslaw Nation. That is the nation, one of the biggest nation on the South Side. They have most of the territory there. And they smuggled me in, and I just started documenting and wanted to make sure that the community gets a voice. And then Rachel and I met a bit later, when that was captured, and we really thought, how can we shape a film out of this? How can we make a film out of this? And we started to brainstorm and really go through all the ups and downs and to the narrative structure, and then really found a way, I think, to cohesively show all sides of the story. And hopefully we were always aligned there. We wanted it to be more than a film. We wanted it to be a movement, something that sparks discussions and hopefully helps change old policies so that smaller communities that are remote and will not get any help would be able to be part of the solution and would be able to defend themselves legally. That's kind of where it went after that.
It's amazing that how devastating these wildfires can be, and they don't just upset a community; they upset a whole ecosystem.
hmm They
They
really
do, and
do.
that's where Rachel has a lot to talk to you about because she was actually a trapper at the time too. Fruit fires. Maybe Rachel, you can explain.
Yeah. I think that was the craziest part. So I had not moved to the south side at that point when the fires had taken off, and I very vividly remember back in 2018, like the whole province was on fire. And you've known me throughout my career as a professional guide, and at the time I was actually guiding in the northeastern part of British Columbia. And when you speak to what the emotions really felt like, I can remember waking up in a tent and I thought it was raining, but it was ash falling on the tent. And I mean, these tents are plastic. I mean, you think of Hilleberg, it's one of the best tents you can get, but the last thing you want is hot ash falling on your tent. And at the time, the other guides and I remember like looking at each other going, how do we evacuate in this circumstance? And we were actually hunting near a burn. And for all of us that are outdoorsmen, hikers, whatever, when you have to go through a burn, that's a myriad of trails that you have to cut. So, for myself, having lived through other fires, in the Okanagan growing up, we had the Okanagan Mountain Park fire. Fire is just a part of life here. And so when it comes to the ecosystems, it's even down to survival tactics, in the initial stages, the guerrilla warfare when you're fighting a fire, but then there's also the aftermath. And I think, speaking to how that really changes the landscape, I got to move to the South Side back in 2022, and I got to see how the solution from the film actually resonated within the community. Joe, I think there was like 28 fires that the South Side actually put out with their own.
27, yeah.
Yeah, 27. So it's a testament, and the cool part is that I lived. It's a very remote community. I remember sitting there and we got Starlink, and it was like, wow, we could download the hockey game, make a phone call on Wi-Fi calling, and be doing emails. Because otherwise, when Joe was growing up, and even to this day, like it's still the last frontier because there's only 2 or 3 spots where you might get one bar of service.
Wow.
So you think about that in a situation where you have an emergency, let alone an environmental emergency. How do you communicate? So, and when I got to live there, we had some record colds in the area, and I mean, it's like being in the mountains. You had Garmin inReaches. And then you knew your neighbor. And I think that was the thing that, being a young girl, getting my training wheels out on the trap line, I knew all the loggers and they kind of knew me, and I had the radio channels, and everyone truly took care of each other out there. And I think that's something that when Joe approached me to help finish telling the story and getting some of the imagery that we needed to help bring the film kind of, what would the technical term be? I mean, you have your B-roll footage, right? So when we looked at what are the successes that have happened on the South Side since the fire, I think that was the cool part, is getting to be a part of telling what it meant to the community in the aftermath on how they came together.
Well, there's something about a small town community that brings you together that you're not going to get in a larger city.
Yeah, for sure. I think that the interesting part about that too is, our community, the South Side, has so many different people from different walks of life. Obviously, 3 indigenous bands on there, Chisholm Carrie Nation being one, but also lots of Mennonites, Mormons, lots of immigrants, like my family moved there from Switzerland. Lots of loggers that have been there for a long time, hippies even, you name it, all different walks of life. But when there's a fire, it does not matter what you believe in, what religion, what political affiliation. At the end, you're all one. You come together to help each other out. And that's something that I think that the city here, I live in Vancouver, can take note sometimes, because it feels like we're way more divided here. Everything is in boxes. While there, it's just you're one. You're there to protect the land. You're there. You have a mutual cause. That's to save what's all of where they live and where they belong. So it's beautiful in a way. And I think Rachel and I both fell in love with the community for that particular reason, just to see how welcoming they are. And even though there's maybe things we don't agree with, or there's things people disagree with, it all doesn't matter. At the end, we're all there for the same reason.
So tell me about the film. How does it start, and how does it encompass everything that these people went through?
Well, it started again in 2018 was the big outbreak, but there is way more to that. Lots went wrong. The province does admit. We just had a very big panel at 2 festivals. One was our BC premiere here, but the other one was a community screening up north where the fires happen in our community in Burns Lake. And we had people from BC Wildfire that were there, in the panel, as well as politicians. And a lot of them agree now that it could have been handled way more. I think it was just when you don't know, when things get overwhelming, the first thing you try to do is to get everybody out or to control everyone, And I think a lot, there were lessons that were learned. Obviously, communities that are, helpless, and bigger communities where there is not equipment available, machinery available, no loggers, no farmers, no people that have that experience, that works, but an umbrella policy is very difficult to implement throughout a whole province where there's different assets. British Columbia, from my home country, it's 25 times Switzerland. The south side is about the size of Jamaica, with only 2,000 people. So it is massive, and you have to treat every community differently and find out what community can be part of the plan and involve them accordingly, and maybe have cross training, of course, so that they train with BC Wildfire. But ignoring and alienating them and punishing for staying behind and protecting their homes and protecting millions of assets that will benefit the whole province, I feel is just wrong. And it's come a long ways. After the fires, Rachel and I had the opportunity to also see the success, the blueprint of the community. The community started, it was a nonprofit organization called Chinook Emergency Society that is very much respected throughout all of Canada, and I think they've even talked to California about exchanging intel. And they came up with communication systems, but more impressively, with the Chesladak Area Nation, they got sponsorship of 12 or 13 fire trailers. And all these fire trailers are spread out through pods throughout the whole community. And when there's a fire, it's communicated where the fire is. Everyone that has a pickup truck can hook on to that fire trailer, can go right to the fire and be there within minutes. BC Wildfire would need days to get there, and the fire would already be at its peak, and then the fire can't be controlled anymore. So that's why it was so efficient, and that's why those 27 major fires were able to be controlled so quickly. And it's certainly a model that other communities could benefit from.
One of the really cool things, though, too, is that you think about in any kind of like community lore, whether it's First Nations, it's the different stakeholders, is that those people intimately know the landscape. And I think that's one thing that with the film, when we start about, the initial reasoning why Joe went up there, but also, all of the byproducts that have really happened since the filming and since everything's come together full circle, is that we have to rely on those communities that know what they're dealing with. And I think that's the hardest part is, when Joe was in there filming and getting turned away and had to get smuggled across on the boat, is that the people that were there that were vested had machinery. They're farmers, they're expediters, they're outfitters, they're people that have been there for generations as well. So, in a natural disaster standpoint, we can understand, people in cities might not have the wherewithal to be able to deal with this. But in remote communities like this, what the goal really ended up being, kind of as like a byproduct, is how can we take the local lore, the people who already have machinery and wherewithal to be actually able to help utilize them to help an already existing thing like the BC wildfire system. So I think that was the neat part, is that as we started telling the story and really diving into it, the community really became alive. And I think that's one thing that I really loved in the storytelling process, is that, you'd see these people there's one grocery store, two grocery stores-ish, one or two gas pumps on the south side, but the ferry is the lifeline. So, you learn how to communicate and say, hey, I'm going to town, and, your chain of friends up and down your road, you do a grocery run or do a girls trip to Costco, that's 4 hours one way. Wow. But you had to have that, I don't want to say old fashioned, but you have to have that very innate communication with everything. So I think, as we told the story, we learned how much more this community has learned how to communicate. And the cool part was, speaking to the Southside Chinook Emergency Response Society, is when we were fighting some of those fires, you could send up a drone, obviously before aircraft came, and we were actually able to use early detection. But we also had people within the community that had radios that actually had clearance to be able to talk to the BC wildfire dispatch and the helicopters. Because a lot of times, Joe, I think there's a couple of different images we have where we had people with trailers on the south side, and some of these tankers were coming in and dropping the solvent on them. I'm not a pilot, but that is some strategic flying that they were doing. But it was neat to be able to communicate, hey, the area is clear, we've got everyone out. So it was a real testament to just a community taking an initiative from their own standpoint of saying, hey, you know what, we're kind of fed up on this point, and we're going to try and be a part of the solution, instead of sitting back and then going, oh, well, they didn't save us.
Well, it's a matter of their own survival at that point.
Exactly.
So either you do it yourself, or, help might not ever come.
Yeah,
So
and I think.
what were the
Go ahead. Sorry,
guys,
Chris.
what were the biggest challenges of creating a film like this?
Well, the biggest challenge is obviously, when you're talking, this is a natural disaster that is happening, right? You can't predict the timing of it. It's not like, if you're making a documentary about, let's say, a painter who has his own studio somewhere, you can go there and you have the times that you can schedule. Here, it's just there's a fire, we got to go film. Because we filmed several times during fires, not just in 2018. We went in again to just see. To also document the strategies now that were implemented, but also to get fire footage. We were able to team up actually with BC Wildfire. It did help, especially because of our collaboration with Josias Carry Nation, flying over the fires with helicopters, even with a float plane once. So those images we had to capture to tell the story. But I think what was the biggest challenge is just to do justice to all the voices. There were so many different parties involved, and we also didn't want it to be a propaganda film. It was very important that we talked to, the politicians involved, that we talked to BC Wildfire high officials, that we talked to the fire chief, that we talked to the RCMP, that's the police force here, just so we have all voices and we gave everyone a chance to tell their perspective. And at the end, I think it makes the film more balanced, and also it will encourage everyone to seek solutions rather than to point fingers. Because I understand that a lot, like BC Wildfire, their hands are tied. A lot is based on liabilities. Policies are based on old policies that are no longer, they should be changed with the current state of the world we're in. And that hasn't happened yet. In Australia, there's an interesting thing. In Australia, the way it works is for smaller communities, if anyone wants to stay behind, they can sign a waiver, and it says, okay, you're on your own now, you're signing off your liability, but they can stay. And I think that would be a better option in a way, or at least something similar, than just forcing everyone to evacuate when there is no solution in play. Because the solution is not, let's have everything burned to the ground. The solution should be, who is able to fight this, and how do we implement this in a way that we can work together, right? And that has not really happened yet. It's in progress, but it's still miles from it.
What was the environmental impact of the
What was lost?
the fire itself?
Mm-hmm.
In the billions, probably. I mean, Mike said it, and I don't have the number in front of me right now. Mike Robertson, who is the senior policy holder of Chislada, he had a full number, and it's insane how much has burned.
Hundreds of millions.
Yeah.
You think that as a First Nation, they're very forthright. They have their own lumber mill and everything like that, and they have their own logging. And that's been like the meat and potatoes of that industry. So it was kind of neat in the film. We got to dive a little bit into the history of the area, because there were First Nations. There also were other settlers as well, that had moved up back, pre Rio Tinto days, before they did the flooding of the actual area. So the area has so much history, Chris, that when you start to put a number on what the area has actually lost, with the fire, you have to take into consideration people had to cut their fences and let their cattle go and let horses go. And, So not only do you have actual physical losses, but you have losses of time. I mean, they fought the fire, what was it, Joe, for a month and a half steady, just 12-hour shifts going back and forth, 24-hour shifts going around the clock. But then you had your mop-up crews, and you think of everyone that had put in and volunteered their time. I mean, it was a grossly underrated amount, I'm sure, when you actually start to think about what people actually lost. And that's from all the different stakeholders.
If I can maybe add something positive, a positive spin here, and that is, it's also in the film, is what was discovered through the fires. And since we were talking about the Josias Carry Nation, what they discovered after the fires, and that's only due to the fires because it wiped clean a whole area, is they found village pits of their village sites, as well as spearheads and tons of bones, and it dates back 10,000 of years. So on the whole south side, there were many thousands of people living there, and we had no idea till the fires actually just uncovered all this. They had a whole archaeological site there where they were uncovering all these things, and it's insane what they found. They found their whole history through the fires. So in a way, it was a blessing in disguise. So that's
Wow,
also
that's amazing.
yeah. So that was one thing that was unpredictable, right? Nobody could have guessed. But yeah, no, that was one of the, I guess, one of the nice things about the fires. The negative things, of course, is aside from the loss, as Rachel said, is also the PTSD, that comes with it. It's much like
Yeah.
being in a war zone. Many
Hmm.
people suffered from depression, respiratory illnesses, cancer. A lot of people got cancer. My dad got cancer, but many people in the community got cancer. And you wonder, there's not enough studies, if maybe, inhaling all this toxic smoke over months would trigger cancer, because it's still not being studied enough, but there's definite inclinations that it can cause a lot of damage, physical damage, mental damage. And that is something that isn't talked about enough when it comes to people living in wildfire zones.
How do they recover from something like this?
I think that was the really cool part coming in on the after side, is that you had different stakeholders come forward, different members of the community that dealt in like the response side to helping getting the insurances. So I know a lot of the farmers and ranchers, they were able to do claims, obviously based on if there was a wildfire disaster, they were able to go and get fencing materials. They obviously had to do the work themselves, but there were ways that the community came back together. And I mean, the hard part is that sometimes it just takes time. I mean, when some of the ranges that I rode up on, riding with some of my friends and people at the time, they would go through and we would recount, because we would do a trail ride up through where some of the hottest parts of the fire was. And being there, I guess that would have been, 4 years later, after 2018, you could see how the flora and fauna were starting to come back. But there were times that people would say, if you rode across that right after, you would almost sink into ash with your horse or your cows, because it had just burnt so deep. So from an ecological standpoint, I mean, these things take hundreds of years to really come back to what they were before the burn. So I think that's the thing that really, whether, First Nations, the BC stewards, and as well as like the other stakeholders and farmers and ranchers, the people that live on the land, that's why it's so important to do proactive backburns, and in cleaning up the underscape of the forest. Because at the end of the day, I mean, obviously, fire is good. It is a part of the regenerative process, but obviously when it takes off like a monster like that, and it just becomes this wall of flame, there's nothing you can do for it. So from my standpoint, when I got to be there and you could slowly see, the root systems coming back, and then you get your flora and fauna that kind of come in that help build that root system back up, and then obviously your deciduous trees come back. It was cool to see how the animals returned, and just listening to the stories of the ungulates returning. And actually, the community, it was great, because they said now they've had endless use of firewood, because all the dead standing were perfect to burn for the winter. And a lot of the homes on the south side are wood fire based. So it was neat to see how, people will take a tragedy and try and find the good and adapt through it.
Finding something out of necessity. I mean, you have a farm that you can't plant. You have cattle that you can't find. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm sure that a lot of animals were lost in the flames.
Unfortunately, a lot of them got burned, yeah, and it's sad. It's very sad. And obviously houses got destroyed, and lots of infrastructure. There was even a lot of people reported, bears obviously got way more aggressive with each other. Lots of cannibalism there, where they killed each other and ate each other just because they didn't have anything to go for. And obviously, animals came way closer to the house. Like even with my parents, like we had all the time, we had a grizzly bear there, or we had bears, or we had people, like animals that would never come that close before, because now they didn't have habitat, right? But as Rachel says, fires can be good, and the Josias Nation is now really approaching the prescribed burns, traditional burns again. They're really going back to that, and they're doing
Yeah.
it with a fire ecologist named Kira Hoffman, who is helping them going back to their traditional ways. And they're doing it safely. My dad, who lives there, is doing the same. He's always clearing the bushes and brushes underneath the trees, so the fire can't travel up.
Yeah.
There's a lot. They know what they're doing. The Southsiders, they study fires. They understand fire. They're not just these ignorant people sitting around. They're not accountants. They're outdoorsy people, and they know what they're doing. They know how to hunt. They know how to defend their homes. They know how to treat fire, and yeah. And Rachel, by the way, she can attest maybe to that. Wasn't when you were trapping, did you notice that after the fires, it changed a bit as to what animals you would be able to, like, was there a difference there? Like, maybe
So
you told me something, I forgot. It was very interesting.
yeah. So I got to mentor under one of the gentlemen who actually owned the trap line and leased it to me. And it was interesting because I did a ride along with him to kind of show me the boundaries of it. And I think for him, it was more of a devastation to see, because he would sit there and recount he'd had it for, dare I say, 30, 40 years. And, and when you think about that local knowledge of going out every winter and checking the same traps or trying different areas, as a trapper, you want to be trapping your viable, youthful population. You don't want to be going after the old population, especially in your marten. And that works for a lot of like your weasel family. So, there were certain areas that he said, oh, this used to be plentiful, and we'd come around the corner, and he hadn't trapped just from health reasons. And, it was humbling to see his eyes just go wide and go, oh, this used to be a thick forest. I could pull, 10 marten out of here every 2 weeks.
Wow.
So for myself, it was taking that knowledge that he imparted with me, looking at the map, and then having to kind of literally grow my own training wheels to go, okay, well, if this is where the animals are going to be, where do I actually want to focus on the trap lines? And so I partnered with the BC Trappers Association, and I did, video traps on the boxes that I did just to see what the activity was. And it actually was really surprising. We wish we would have had data from a couple years after the fire, but in a way, maybe it was a blessing in disguise, because with it being 4 or 5 years at that time after the initial, fire that surged through, it was encouraging to see a young population coming back, in my marten catches. And I even had a wolverine that I caught on my trap line. And
Wow.
it was something that, he hadn't seen. He's like, 30 years ago they used to come through. So he said it was encouraging to see the amount of tracks that happened, as far as like the lynx population, the rabbit population, and how everything was really coming back to the area. So for myself, it was, at the time, I had been a part of a ranch in the area, so I had rode the ranges in the summer. And so getting to be out on my snow machine in the fall and in the winter, it was really cool to appreciate how the land is used by all the different animals throughout the different parts of the year. Especially coming from a big hunting background like myself, it was something that I absolutely loved and I would geek out on. I could just sit there on my snow machine and I'd be looking at all the tracks, and I would make notes in my little journal of, the different movements I'd seen and where the ungulates would be based out of. And in a way, it was encouraging. But I imagine for those years after, when the animals are slowly trusting the area to come back to it, based on population dynamics and growth models, it was really neat in a positive light. But I could only imagine what it was like. Some of the other fires I've seen, animals, it's a fight or flight, and they want to get the heck out of the area and to water. So being the land of lakes, I think that's some of the things, like there's so many things we can touch on, that happened with the film and getting to be there. It literally is called the Lakes District. So there's a lot of different aquatic areas. And so that was the neat part in like storytelling, is that when the word got out that Joe and I were actually partnering up to help get the last of this imagery and try to do some of these follow-up interviews, the community really came together. And then we had people from other jurisdictions coming forward saying, hey, we know the gentleman that got turned around. I can get you his contact information, because we had someone, Jeff showed up, and he literally had equipment that could have put the fire out. They literally moved water across mountains. And so we touch on it, and but that was
Uh,
just, part of policy. And so I think that's the
yeah.
part about this film is that while it has a cultural community resonant heart and it's centered around Joe and his family and how it really helped them, in a way it speaks to everyone that really lives in a remote community because there's different things that we all face. And I think that's something that everyone has something to take away from this film.
So where can people see the film?
Well, now it's doing the festival circuit, so we're hoping for a lot more festivals still. It's been in like 7 so far. We started about a month ago, so we have a really good quota. You know, getting those awards is really helpful. It gives the film value and respect. And then we're hoping for a theatrical distribution. I'm actually, funny enough, because I'm also Swiss, we might get, we're hoping or planning a theatrical distribution there, but as well here in Canada. It will be a small one, but it will be nice to if we can manage to get it into cinemas. And then after that, obviously, the goal will be to get it on a streaming platform. So in due time, we're also thinking we've been approached. This is very interesting. We've been approached by universities and people that want to utilize this film about not just study of wildfires, but also indigenous stewardship, but also communities, remote communities. So there's a lot of interest. And again, that was Rachel and my hope is that the film will go way beyond just being a film. That it will be something that would really help. And so that was interesting. Like even Missouri, actually, and a university in Missouri wanted us to go. So we'll see. The states seem interested too. We got into Houston, Texas Film Festival there, World Fest.
I
Yeah.
saw that.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that was pretty neat. I humbly, when you start looking into some of these film festivals, I mean, Steven Spielberg and George Lucas have been some of the names that have graced like the film festival down in Houston. So for
Wow.
us, I think it was really cool to be able to. It started out with Joe's passion to tell the story, and then I was able to come in and with a combined passion, and then the team behind Joe and everyone that's worked on the editing and the post proc. It's been cool to see the response. Humbling, but
I'm
also
sure there's a
like,
whole educational value behind it as well.
yeah.
For sure. I'm not going to lie, though. Rachel was mainly excited about going to Houston so she could wear her cowboy boots and her cowboy hat. That was her main. She was just really excited about showing off that cowboy hat. She looked great, though. There's some
Yeah.
great photos of her with that award and the cowboy hat.
I'll tell you what, I'll give you a hot tip. Don't ever wear a denim tuxedo, a Canadian tuxedo down to Houston in the end of April. I'll tell you what, that was a whole different left of humid.
Is it hot, eh? Yeah, I imagine. Yeah. No, but it's we're really fortunate to be honest, that the film because you never know. This is a story about a small community, in rural northern BC.
Yeah. Yeah. California goes through their wildfires all the time, and there's communities still trying to recover from it. So, yeah, there's definitely value.
Hmm. Well, I think that's something too, is that with the success of the Chinook emergency partnered with the Chislada, is that you basically you can give the right tools to any community, right? And coming down to a training. And I think that's part of the solution is when you have government agencies that are so strapped. And I mean, right now we're coming into another fire season, and I have friends that I know that work in BC wildfire, and they're like, we've had 3 fires already that could have gotten out of control. And we're just coming into the beginning of May. So I think our hope is not only did we want to help share, the different sides of the story, but that you can inspire other communities to take matters into their own hands, especially in today's world where, you know, we have to fight for what we even have. The ranchers, the people, the different stakeholders of the land, to be able to protect what it is that generations or even first generations are just trying so desperately to hold on to. So,
All right. Well, where can we find out more about the film? Where can we get previews? Um,
between our Instagram and our Facebook pages, we have it on YouTube as well. And
Hmm.
what we're gonna look to do is just share little tidbits of it. But obviously, as Joe mentioned, like the really cool part about having traction with a documentary like this is working towards that theatrical run, because that's these things aren't cheap. And I will say that there has been a lot of blood, sweat, and tears from Joe and his team and the executive producers and myself that at the end of the day we're telling a story because it's a passion. So now we're just trying to make sure that film is honored in such a way that it really brings to fruition and is that training tool perhaps, which is something we never really anticipated for. So
All right. Well, I appreciate you both taking the time to speak to us today. Head over to the website, take a look, and keep an eye out for when it comes to a streaming service or a theater near you.
thank you so much, Chris.
My pleasure. No problem.
We love our children. We protect them. We guide them. We prepare them for life in the world. With all that we do, from deep in our hearts, we cannot control all things. Life-threatening illnesses and disabilities affect far too many of our children each year. While we cannot change the circumstance, we can make dreams come true. Dreams to provide hope, to provide spiritual healing and strength, to provide moments of happiness and relief in the hardest of times. We can give a glimmer of light and hope in a time of darkness and despair. Join huntofalifetime.org to help make dreams come true, to provide hope for children with life-threatening illnesses and disabilities. Hunt of a Lifetime is a nonprofit organization fulfilling dreams for hunting and fishing trips to youth 21 and under with life-threatening illnesses and disabilities. Visit huntofalifetime.org to learn how you can make a difference.